Hi guys, in 5 minutes time I'm going to be showing you all the steps required to sculpt anything you want freehand. See you then, bye! Hi guys, welcome. I'm Carly from Carly's Creative Clay. I hope you've all had a good week. My week has been pretty bad. I have been bedridden with a virus. Hi Arty Hearty Life. So I've been out of touch with literally everyone and not been doing too great. I figured I didn't want to cancel streaming today, but I'm too painful to actually do any clay work right now. So what I thought I'd do is talk you through all the planning needed in order to sculpt any project you like. So instead of having to follow tutorial steps, this will give you the ability to take any idea you have and make your own freehand sculptures of it. So I'm going to get started by showing something that's from my shop in the top corner there. That's my purple dragon. It's available for £30. There is only one of these.
Hearty Life says, I'm sorry to hear that, Carly. Take it easy.
Thank you, Arty Hearty Life. I think everyone in the UK either is ill with a virus or knows someone that's ill with a virus at the moment. I've heard it's so much going around. And I did do a lot in November and December, so my body was really looking to find a way to get me to go to bed and stay there. And it did. There's worse things out there. I will get over this. So yes, only one of these purple dragons available. And I'm showing this off because next week I'm going to make a similar dragon in dark red to go with the woman that I've been sculpting. Whoops, let's move these out of the way. I baked her up and she's looking good. So I'll give you a quick look at her once I stash that dragon.
Hearty Life says it's a lovely colour combo.
Thank you, I love pink and purple. So she is baked up and looking good. She survived pretty well in the oven. There's a very few little cracks formed in her. If I bring it up close, I don't know if you can see. And what I will do to fix those, because what's probably happened is the oven's gone too hot at one point, is...
Oh, she looks stunning.
Thank you, Arty Hearty Life. I'll be getting raw clay and just smearing it over where the cracks are, and then using a tool just to take off the excess surface, so all that you're left with is the cracks filled with raw clay, and then rebake her, and that will sort it out absolutely fine. But I'm going to be making her dragon to go with her, and that will be hopefully next week when I feel a bit better and more able to clay. So the process of planning for when you want to sculpt something, you'll have in your head an idea of a rough idea of what you want to make. So you'll pick an animal. For this instance, I've done a lot of the pre-planning on a rabbit, but I will talk you through like other animals so you can see what I mean. But all of your sculpting, you're starting out by going online, and you're going to get pictures of what you want to make. This is the example for the rabbit. So what you've got there, the terms you're putting into Google Image are side view, top view, front view, back view, bottom view, cartoon of the animal, because that's more simplified lines. You can also, and I really advise this, get some pictures of the animal in the pose that you want. So sitting up, jumping, laying down, rolling over, whatever it is. But them doing those movements changes their body shape. So you need to put those terms into the search engine. So once you've got some images that are like what you want to make, as a side note, I'd also say for me personally, I don't like to look up pictures of someone else's sculpture of the thing that I'm trying to make, because my nature will be to copy it. And by looking at photos or pictures of things that aren't in the same medium you're working in, so drawings or paintings, sometimes even things like teddy bears, they give you an idea of proportion and shape without telling your mind to make a carbon copy of that thing, so they don't influence you, and you start to build your own way of doing things and your own style. But always start with the pictures and get them laid out. I use Quick Collage and Google Images, and I just crop them down and put them in a Quick Collage. Quick Collage is a phone app for Android that is a free one. I'm pretty sure most computers and phones have their own collage making apps and programs. So that I find useful. So with that to one side, the next thing you're thinking about are your very basic shapes. And the ones I find that I use the most are these: square, triangle, circle, teardrop. And you'll see this one referred to as a stick, a log, a sausage, basically a long stick of clay. Now, you will find that there will be variants of it. So, for instance, the square shape can be rectangles, can be smaller or larger, can also be made as a flat like a picture or as a 3D cube. Same for triangles, got an even bigger range because there's lots of different types of triangles, and all of them can be made flat or 3D. And with the ball, I'm putting a semicircle under that because it is really half a ball, but you do use a lot of semicircles in your work. The teardrop, that can form all sorts of shapes if you do things like thin out and extend the top, and you can shrink them down and all sorts of things, but it's basically one side thicker than the other going up. And again, for the sticks, you've got your long, very thin ones, you've got really fat, stubby, almost pill shaped ones. You can have them with flat ends, you can have them with rounded ends. Then we end up with the other category, and I'm going to get back to the other category. So these are the sort of shapes you're thinking in first off. And what you're going to do is, using your images, or the other thing I like to use is little plastic models, kids' toy models. And I try not to go for the ones with too much detail that will influence me, just the basic shape. You're going to then write out all your components. That's, for a better look, that's the component picture. Yeah? So, what we got was starting, I always start top to bottom. Yeah? So you're going for your ears, you're drawing a rough shape so that you can then start to try and match them up to this sort of shapes. Roughly what colours you're going to use and how many of them you're going to need. So this is your component list from there to... Right, so skip the bottom 3 lines. The rest of it is your components list. And if you can see, a lot of a rabbit is teardrops. Except that body shape. You can either call that... Sorry, go back off the thing. The rabbit shape, body shape, you can either call that a teardrop, or if it was sitting down and not up on its front paws, it would look more of a slanted semicircle. But those two are quite interchangeable, I find. But teardrops are one of my most used things, because even when you get down to the legs, it is a teardrop, but it's a teardrop with the tip bent sideways. So if I was to straighten that leg out, the hip's the top of the teardrop, and then you'd have a leg like that. So the more you get into it, the more you realise, you start to notice the basic shape even once it's been bent around a bit. So an ear, it is a teardrop, the bottom is wider than the top, but it is quite an extended one. I mean, you can also argue it as an egg shape, but I argue that the sides are not wide enough for that. So what I'm saying is, one person's layout sheet, someone else may look at it and go, that's not that shape, that's this shape, because they do cross over so closely. But they are there. There are sometimes other shapes, so things like cloud shapes and miscellaneous things, and we will get into that. What I like to, first off, I divide them out into their basics, and if there's any that don't fit into those basic shapes, I then put them as a side note, so then I can work out how to do them. And sometimes it can be adding a couple of basic shapes together. So a cloud are lots of different balls, a flower you'll find are lots of different raindrop shapes, teardrops. So it's a good exercise as you go through life. If you've got a bit of time where you're not doing anything, so you're sat in a waiting room, or you're at a meeting that you actually don't need to think about, sit there and pick a subject and start to break it down into its basic shapes. And it can be anything: a building, an animal, a person, a plant. But the more you do it, the more you start to see things broken into those basic shapes. Does that make sense so far? Now, the last part of it, once I've got it planned, we're going to look at structural stabilities. So where is your model liable to fall apart? And you're looking for very thin bits or weight bearing bits, and you're going to need to take a note of those, because these are going to need something called an armature, basically something added for structural stability. And what we generally use is florist wire of different thicknesses. So on this rabbit, because we want those front paws not laying against the ground, I would probably put a bit of wire in there just to help keep that strength. And where that head joins onto the neck, if you don't push it on hard enough, it's going to come unstuck and fall off. And what I find is, in order to push it on hard enough, I'm going to misshapen the head. So what I like to do is cut a small bit of wire, stick it into the body, and then put the head on that, and that just gives it an extra hold. It's like a peg system. Not necessarily with the ears, because they're down against the body is going to give it a lot of structural stability, and you're smoothing that top bit in, so you're getting a better join than what you're going to get just pushing the head on. But if you wanted a rabbit with ears that stick up away from the body, then I would put wire in for that. So anything that is liable to break off because it's thin, you're going to work out some wire for. The other thing,
you can do that in retrospect, can't you, if it breaks off in the oven or whatever?
it's harder to do in retrospect because the clay would have been baked. I have done it. usually by adding raw clay around the wire, but it's a real faff. It's better to work it out pre-planning. So you've got all the thin bits to take note of. Then you've got the other side of the spectrum, the very thick areas. So this body is going to be quite chunky, depending on how big I made that rabbit. If it's more than 2 centimeters thick, I would make a foil center. And the reason behind that is when you bake your clay, it's all the clay has to reach the 110 if it's FIMO. I can't remember Sculpies. But you've got to reach the temperature on the pack for it to turn hard. So if you've got a thick amount of clay, right in the centre can stay soft even though the outside's gone hard. And that is not ideal. You'll find well packed foil is far more stable. So what we do is we make foil balls or foil teardrops, or sometimes foil sticks for human bodies for that long fin, but a shape that would sit in the middle of this. Make sure you pack it down hard. I use the glass workboard to roll it quite smooth. Alternatively, cover it in masking tape, because you don't want any of those metal little pointy bits than sticking through your clay. I've never found that the masking tape, even when it's got pointy bits, they tend to lay flat under the clay.
Is it better to do both rather than risk it? Or?
If you're gonna masking tape, it's not worth doing that level of time to make sure the foil's completely smooth. If you're not gonna masking tape, take extra time to really make sure it's quite smooth. So what I would do, if you're finding that you're going to need a lot of different wire bits and a big foil middle, I would make a skeleton first out of those bits. So for instance, this is me making a human armature. So I've got one wire through here. That's a loop of wire like that I've twisted at the shoulders to attach that bit in. And then a loop came down for the legs. The reason why I like to do this is you will find your clay gets softer before it goes hard. So if it's carrying too much weight, it can crumble in the oven, and I've had it happen. You can repair and stick it all back together with raw clay and rebake it, but if you've got that as a possibility, you're better off making a wire skeleton and then build your clay around that.
If it flops over before it bakes, you can end up with it in a shape that you can't recover from.
Jamie was saying if it falls over, the other thing you can have is it form shapes and positions that you weren't intending, where it's leaning against something you weren't planning to have leant against. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Basically,
so
if you had a person and it flopped in half,
so
you couldn't recover
yeah,
that shape with
if you had a person and it fell in half and was bent over, the only way of recovering it would be to snap it and then try and reform it, and it's a real hassle. It's far less hassle to make your wire skeleton. Now, for something like a rabbit, especially where I want the legs stood up, the easiest thing to do with a 4-legged animal is you make your tinfoil ball and then you stick bits of wire, just poke it in at the angle you want the leg, and you want the wire to be slightly shorter than you want the leg, so you don't want any wire sticking out. It's easier than trying to make a full skeleton and then wrap the tinfoil around like I did on the chest here. And you'll find that just sticking it into the foil is enough. It is easier to at least make the holes for the wire at this stage through into the body.
Don't forget you're addressing the gentleman.
Yeah. Sorry, I only turn around when you talk to me, so you telling me don't forget to look forward ain't helpful.
I'm sorry.
Sorry about this. You can make the leg with the clay and a bit of wire sticking out and then push it on afterwards, but you're in real danger of misshaping the work you've already done. So I tend to try and do all that first. The other thing you can find, if you've got clay around the wire before you push it in, if you haven't made a guide hole with a bit of wire first, when you push, because you're getting the resistance from the tin foil, your clay just goes forward and the wire stays put, and you end up
like
with the
wires.
wires.
Bone that sticks out.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's
yeah. I have done that so many times with dragon wings. It's so annoying because where it happens on the dragon wing, I show you. You push on like that, and it comes out there. The whole of that goes down, and you end up with a wire sticking up, and you're then pushing it back up, reforming it back over. If you've done scale work, you're even more annoyed because you've got to take all the scales off and relay them. So my advice is get your needle tool, look at what angle you want those wings. So like that, and you put in your guide hole like that into the foil ball, and then you put the wire through the hole that you've already made. And that is my rule for adding wire to the outside of foil balls on everything, because it is very disheartening. You can repair it. I have repaired it. But you'll only do that a few times before you learn by a stinging mistake to not forget that stage. So, if it helps, you can also draw out a plan on the back of what the wire, all the armature will look like. So we'd need a little foil teardrop, and my drawing skills are rubbish, and that's fine because no one else is going to see them normally. We're going to need wire front legs at that sort of angle. The back legs we won't need because they're very stable and close into the body and are going to be against the ground. We may, if I was making this as a rabbit that sort of size, you would need a little foil ball for the head. So I do a little separate one, and then wire between that, and again make guide holes with either a bit of wire that you've got laying around or with your needle tool, and then just slot it in as a peg. So that would be my armature. So I would make that bit first with the 3 bits of wire, and then another little foil ball, and then start getting my clay and adding that round it. Does that make sense? So let's hold this up. So doesn't look much like a rabbit, but it tells you all the armature support that you're going to need to make if you were needing to do that. Something, if I was making it this sort of small, you wouldn't really need to make any armatures, although I still sometimes peg the heads on. Yeah? And even if there's not a foil ball, I would still advise doing a guide hole just in case, because it's better safe than sorry. Right, so you have planned it out. You've got your shapes, you've got your centres, you've got your colours. if you were making a scale model, this is the only other side bit I would say, that makes things a lot harder. Because what you've got to do at this stage, you've got to work out the dimensions of each of the bits.
Mary Hedgehog says, how do you decide whether something's big enough to need an armature or not?
If in doubt, do an armature. If it's the foil ball, if the clay's going to be thicker than 2 to 3 centimeters, you need to include the foil. The wire, if it's sticking out of the main part of the body at all, or it's weight bearing, you need some wire. Because my standpoint is, it's pretty cheap off of eBay, and remember, the smaller the number, the thicker the wire for florist wire. So very, very fine has a really high number, whereas the thick stuff, it's something in the teens. So yeah, so if in doubt, florist wire it. It's not expensive and it saves you a lot of headache at the end, because it is very, very demoralizing watching your project fall apart in the oven. So if you're doing, if say someone said to me, I want a rabbit that is 2 centimeters by 3 centimeters, and you've got to be exact on that. At this stage, you plan out the height, width and depth of each of the component bits so that they all add up to the right size. What I tend not to do it because I hate maths and it is real maths heavy. What I would do is I would draw the front view to size on the paper, and then the side thickness, I would get a ruler and draw a line and put an S, and then a line and depth, so then I can hold my clay up to it. You can use a ruler and just keep measuring everything. It's hard, but so I find it easier to write out all my measurements on a bit of paper, so then I haven't got to remember them all. Yeah. Rulers help. The other thing that you will find helpful is a caliper. What this is, you can set it to a measurement, then you tighten the nut and it holds it in that position, and you can go around and check that the thing you made fits in. It helps your job get a little easier. But I wouldn't suggest starting with a 2-scale model. Just start freehanding it and just working on picturing things in those shapes. So, in the spirit of that, what I've got are lots of different animals, and we can talk through some shapes for them. Yeah? So, first off, a good example of how the position changes the animal shapes are these cats. Can you see the body shape gets wider and flatter when it lays down? When it goes up, you're getting more of that jelly bean shape. Yeah? You still got, the tail doesn't change too much, although when they lay down, again, the fur spreads. So it changes the direction, the way the hair actually lays. So all this sort of stuff needs to be taken into account. But if you look, there are mainly sticks and teardrops going on in animals. They there's very, very few squares. Couple of balls, but generally nature doesn't do a lot of actual square shapes, I've found, outside of rocks. So for a bird, you've got the teardrop body, you've got a teardrop wing, you've got a teardrop head. The beak, it's a triangle that you have bent over, basically. You can sometimes have a couple of shapes together. Let's see if I can find anything with that. So the claw, that is a triangle but with 2 sticks. So just because it's one body part doesn't mean it's only one shape. Sometimes you've got to break one body part down into a couple of shapes to achieve it. But it quickly becomes apparent that, again, we're still dealing with sticks, triangles, circles, teardrops and squares. Things like the main body, the hexagon, yeah, I think that's 6, 2, 3, yeah, 6, would count as another. So it's very rare for there to be other shapes, but they do come up. You can do it as a square and 2 triangles, or you can just acknowledge it as a hexagon, but that is its simpler shape. But as you can see, these are what you mainly come up with. The other one I'd say that you do come up with more regularly is the leaf shape, which really it's just a teardrop but you point it up the other end. So it's still quite a simple shape, and the only reason you come across that a lot is because a lot of eyes wind up that shape. But weirdly enough, if you can see, actually in the construction of eyes, you're very rarely actually making the leaf shape. You're making a ball for the eyeball and then a stick for the bottom eyelid and a semicircle for the top eyelid. So you're still back on balls, semicircles and sticks. So it's easy to start breaking it all down into their shapes. Again, a pig head you can count as a teardrop even though the snout is flat. It's a modified teardrop, but nonetheless. The swirl of the towel, it's still a stick even though it's been laid in a different position. And I warn you, once you start practicing this a while, you will start going around in your daily life and a little bit of your brain is just seeing the world in these shapes. It becomes very second nature. You end up really only having to write out sheets like this on very complicated makes to make sure that you've remembered it all, and that you have the other thing that this helps with is when you're sculpting, especially with polymer clay, if you can make all the lightest colour bits first and work your way up to the darkest and brightest colours, you have to wash your hands less. So on this, I would make the white ear centre, the white mouth and nose front bit, the white towel, then move on to all the tan bits, then the pink nose. It seems counterintuitive, but it just means you're washing your hands a little less. When I started, I didn't do that though. I did do it in whichever order actually felt more intuitive to me, which usually starts with the main body and then working out, because then you've got a size reference. But over time you will be able to put in colour order. So at the bottom of the layout sheet, I've put all the inclusions that I'm going to need for this. So the foil ball and masking tape for the body. For one that side I won't need to do the head, but I'd also put head underneath if it was a bigger one. Black beads for the eyes. I would say it will be far easier for you for eyes on animals and humans. Either use glass beads or make the eyes separate, bake it, and then add a baked eyeball into your model. Trying to add wet clay that is soft into an eye socket and sculpt the eyelids, it's very, very difficult. You can't move the eyelids around because you're going to smudge colour onto your raw clay. It just makes life so much easier, to the point where I have a box full of eyeballs. Eyeballs and teeth, they're the ones that are liable to get really smudged. I do show in previous videos on how I make eyeballs, but basically it's a ball of white. I get a ball tool, which is one of these. They come in lots of different sizes. Generally you get them either with this wooden sort of handle or with this blue rubbery sort of handle. The reason why this one's pink is because I used it so much I cracked down the wood, so I clay covered it. You can clay cover your tools if you want to make them thicker. If you've got bad hands, they go through the oven fine generally. Mainly because I hate using plastic tools. You can use them, but I dislike it. But so yeah, use a ball tool, put the outside colour, use your ball tool to stamp it in so it makes that little cup. You put a little ball of black in the middle, not really stuck down, for the iris, and then I fill it up with liquid polymer clay and bake it. So now I can add that in and push on it and it won't smudge. I can put an eyelid over it and start adjusting where the eyelid lays, and that will be fine. So do yourself a favour, pre-make your eyes. The other thing I use for eyes, which I really enjoy, are various sizes of little glass beads. And what that can end up looking like, if you see on this dragon, you get a nice little glint of glass. Especially if you put tin foil behind it. If you're going to use glass inclusions, what I do is I tear off a tiny little circle of tin foil, put that where I'm going to put the bead, and then push the bead onto the tin foil and into the place so the tin foil lines the eye socket. And what that does, instead of having just dark clay behind the bead, the reflectiveness of the tin foil will mean that when light comes in, it bounces around a bit more, so you get to see more of the colour and more of a glint in the eye. Doesn't matter if the foil sticks over slightly because you're going to put eyelids in around it. So yeah, it's a good idea. And anything that can go through an oven at 110 can be included. So glass, stone, even some plastics I found out. I was pretty surprised about that. But yeah, so you've got your, it's as wide as your imagination. What else can I say? I've not found with cat's ears, because they're very small, that I've had to do a wire armature for them.
I do love this. That's such a neat trick.
Yeah, I really do like using glass beads, and they're cheap. I've got a load of them in various sizes. The other one that I find makes a really good eye is cat's eye beads. Can you see they've got that reflective line down them? So when you embed that in, you get a glint of reflective line when you catch it. And the good thing about beads is, so long as you make sure that you put the holes to the side, they don't look like beads. Does that make sense? So yeah, these are corner cutting techniques so that you can get an effective eye without having to sit there and make eyes. And yeah, you can really go as far as you want with all this. Oh, the last thing I would say is looking at structural stability. Do you need a base or do you not need a base? Can it all be freestanding? If your model is going to be angled forward or back or not really on a centre of balance, or you've got them in a position where it's going to be hard to stand them up, I would suggest making a clay base and the armature, bring it down longer so that you can embed it into the base, especially if it's not got a centre of balance on it, okay? So like my woman, I've put pegs in her feet. I have got another peg that's going in there. So when I embed her into the base, it's going to make it easier for her to stand up. I like putting bases on things for that reason, and you will find that a lot of things you will have an easier time with a base. So horses, for instance, you've got to get their hoofs completely level in order for them to stand up, and even on this model they haven't achieved it, see? So if I was able to stick the hooves that are on the ground down onto a base, that would stand up really well. So that's another one. If in doubt, just add a base to it. Now you can buy wooden plinths offline, and they're really expensive. I don't. I make my own. Sometimes I'll make a few and have them baked to one side. So I've got this with Guardian of My Last Marble on it, and I'm going to stick a dragon holding a marble when I get round to it. So you don't even have to make them at the time you're making something else. If you want something to do that's really easy, that you can't mess up, make a few bases for future models. And you can always use a needle tool if you want to put pegs in what's going to stand in the base to bore out a hole, because baked clay is actually quite easy to carve into. Easy-ish, I would say. Anyway, so any questions on any of this that you have, do let me know, and I hope it was helpful. And if you have any projects that you use this for, let me know how they went. I'd be really interested to see if it was a useful tutorial for you all. I'm going to head off. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week when I do some dragon sculpting. Okay, bye.